and welcome to Art Alive. As part of Liverpool Irish Festival, a collective of women have put up an exhibition tracing the story of contraception and abortion in Ireland over more than 4 decades. Women to Blame looks at women's rights, court cases and individual stories of people who have fought and keep fighting for more justice on women's independence over their sexual health.
We thought the story had to be told because now there's a whole generation of younger people who don't know about what happened in the 70s, the 80s and the 90s, and how hard it was to get contraception legalised in the 20th century. And now there's even more difficulties in trying to permit Irish women to have abortions in Ireland, especially in cases like rape or incest or the rape of a child, or very particularly in the case of Liverpool, the issue of fatal fetal abnormalities, which are pregnancies that will not realise themselves with a live birth, but such mothers at the moment have to come and have their terminations in Liverpool. So there's a special connection between Liverpool and Ireland in terms of women's reproductive rights. So there is a kind of sisterhood here between the two countries and the cities that have been involved over the years. For example, one of our stories is about the banning of a magazine in the 1970s that was produced in London, a magazine called Spare Rib. And this magazine had articles and advertisements about contraception, and it was banned. And one of the sellers of this newspaper, called Marie McMahon, she was actually prosecuted in court for selling obscene publications. And we tell the story of how she appeared in court and how she had to have a picket outside to get her released, and how she was threatened with prison for simply conveying these ideas. So we were living in a very autocratic and censorship a censorship society which suppressed women's bodies and knowledge and suppressed how women can control their fertility, including as married women or women who were thinking of having children. And indeed, it was a married woman, Mrs. McGee, who came from County Louth, a woman who had a husband who was a fisherman and who lived in a mobile home. She was a woman who took a very important court case in the 1970s when she imported from England some contraceptives because she already had 4 children, and there was a risk that if she had any more, it would give her a heart attack through rising blood pressure, and she was prosecuted. And this case eventually ended up in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So the story of women's reproductive rights that we're telling is a story about Ireland, about England, about court cases in France, court cases that ended up in Luxembourg. It's really a very European story.
But that's also because women still have to go abroad to get an abortion, so they have to travel, they can't stay in the country.
And it seems to us very hypocritical that on the one hand you can't have an abortion in Ireland, but on the other hand you can leave the country and come to England, for example, and have an abortion. So it's almost like if you're out of sight, you're out of mind. But it's also, in my opinion, it's depriving women of the status of democratic citizens entitled to control their own fertility in their own country, with their own doctors, in their own environment. And instead of that, they're actually displaced persons, you could say, temporarily displaced in order to obtain their rights in England. And we feel the Irish government should actually concede the right to women to control autonomously their bodies. And they should do this by removing a clause from the Irish Constitution, which is called the 8th Amendment, and which puts the right to life of the mother and the right to life of the fetus on an equal plane. And we would say, well, actually the mother's right to life should take precedence where there's a risk. And there have been many instances of risks and threats, and women have one or two women have actually died because they were not able to obtain an abortion. And in the case of migrant girls, for example, one of them earlier this year was obliged to give birth to a child of rape against her will because she couldn't get out of Ireland quickly enough to get an abortion in England. So it is giving rise to huge scandals and human rights breaches. And that's why so many of us now in Ireland are asking for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment. This is our slogan. And we hope that people in Liverpool and other parts of England will join us in attempting to repeal the Eighth Amendment.
For this exhibition, the collective has been digging through archives and based the project on signs, photographies, newspapers articles and infographics, but also thanks to the help of the general public, who have been very supportive in telling a story too often set aside.
We took it more periods than chronologically. In the first period, there were lots and lots of protests. And then in the 80s, you started getting lots and lots of court cases. And a lot of money had to be spent in financing these court cases, even where the lawyers agreed to act for little or no fee. I went to one of the court cases in Strasbourg, and it was the amount of documentation that had to be supplied. I mean, it was that thick to actually get a case heard in Strasbourg. And that was the case of the right of organisations in Ireland, doctors and clinics, to give information to women about where they could get an abortion in Europe. And this information was suppressed in Ireland. But the case was won in Europe and Strasbourg. And thanks to this case, we were then able to obtain legally information about where you could go in England or Belgium or Holland or France if you needed a pregnancy termination. And there are no exceptions to the Eighth Amendment. So women who are raped, women who are the victims of incest, women who have experienced violence, women who have fragile mental health, they all have to give birth if they become pregnant in Ireland. And it's not just for Irish women, it's women in Ireland. So it's women of any nationality in Ireland. And that's part of the story that we're telling, that this law is absolutely enormously expansive and influences other pieces of health legislation. We wanted images that showed individual women as well as large groups of protesters, because we all agreed that the individual woman or man can also play a role in history. It is not always the very big movement, but individuals can determine themselves what they believe in, and individuals should have, in a democracy, the right to express their views and to take actions in conformity with those views. And we wanted that kind of thinking to be within the exhibition. So we have lots of pictures of individuals and groups of friends or companions, as well as large protests, which shows that sometimes collective action has to be big to make an impact.
Contraception was illegal in Ireland up until 1980, and the sales of condoms were subject to prescriptions up until 1985. Several court cases, like the one of Miss X, a 14-year-old girl who got pregnant after being raped in 1991, raised the public's attention, but to this day, abortion remains an illegal act in Ireland and can only be performed when there is a real risk to the woman's life.
If you assist a person to have an abortion in Ireland, the current penalty is 14 years in prison. It's the same as murder, 14 years in prison. So this is a huge sanction and a huge menace and threat, in my opinion, to the liberty and freedom of women in a democracy. The sanction is totally disproportionate. And you can see that in some of the posters in the exhibition, how one of them says, girls just want to have fundamental rights. And I think that sums up a lot of the feeling of younger women about this question. They think it's backward, they think it's old-fashioned. But we wanted in the exhibition to give a bit of depth as well. It's not just slogans, but this has a particular legal, social and economic history. At the moment, the politicians appear to be more backward than the people. Opinion polls keep showing that an ever greater proportion of the population of all ages are now ready for a new law that would liberalise and open up the question of a pregnancy termination, and not just for women who are feeling suicidal, but in other cases as well, and in fact maybe more openly in general. There is a risk that if you confine the law just to particular cases like rape or incest, that in fact the women who need abortions will find that having to demonstrate evidence for this, such as evidence they've been raped or evidence of incest, which is very difficult to definitively prove, that in fact the law won't meet the needs of those for whom it is intended. So in fact, a wider law would actually better capture the needs of women than merely providing one or two grounds on which abortion would be permitted.
After the break on Art Alive, we'll have a look at Kevin Crooks' exhibition on reserve. Welcome back to Art Alive. The exhibition on reserve at the Word of Glass in St. Helens presents the work of Kevin Crooks on Army Reservists. Through photographs and interviews, the artist has been looking at what makes someone become a reservist and the sense of unity that belongs to these unknown communities.
This particular body of work, the video that you see is from the barracks in St. Helens. I did, previous to this, work and do exactly the same thing within a Birkenhead barracks. It's a reservist barracks. And it was really because I got invited there. And then once I did that, I thought, well, it would be interesting to do it in St. Helens because it's my hometown, and also because I got funding through the Heart of Glass. And the Heart of Glass have funded the developments of the project. So I was quite adamant that I wanted to produce the work in the town with the support of organisations within the town, and then obviously look at exhibiting it within a gallery within the town as well. And it really to try and encourage that kind of engagement with, because I feel that these are in some ways a detached community, because it's closed off to a certain extent, because obviously it has to be in terms of the security of the place. People aren't necessarily aware of what goes on within the confines of that particular space. And really, for me, it was about trying to encourage that and trying to allow people to have an insight into what goes on within their own town, within these particular organisations, communities. It started from an interest that I had within the military, but more specifically obviously about the reserves, really because of previous family involvement in the reserves. I've got a lot of family members who have either served within the military or been part of the reserves, which used to be known as the Territorial Army. So that was the kind of the main main motivation for starting the project. On starting the project, as I say, through the MA, I started becoming more and more interested in the topical nature of the content of the work. So it really involved me going to a number of different barracks, interviewing reservists and getting an idea as to why they joined, what the motivations were, what they felt about being part of the reservist, not necessarily about more holistically about being involved within the military, although that was a kind of part of it. It was about the reservist element and how they kind of balance that civilian and military life. And like I said, what they ultimately gained from it. I kind of started by interviewing a number of individuals. So obviously, as you see here, these are a number of interviews that I've edited together, and it's really they're in response to a series of questions, a series of questions, and I've edited together in a kind of chronological order. So there is some kind of constructive narrative throughout that provides answers to the questions that I initially had. And my idea was to give people a better understanding of the people who were involved, not necessarily about, I suppose in kind of contrast to what the general mainstream media perception of the reservists are. So I did want to get an insight into the kind of personalities of the people who I was working with, to try and kind of encourage that engagement between the audience and the people who are portrayed within the footage. There is a topical quality to the work, in the fact that recently there's been changes to the reserves. There's been a recruitment drive towards increasing the numbers of reserves, and that kind of falls in line to the general reduction in costs to the overall military. So they've looked at reducing the numbers of regulars whilst increasing the numbers of reservists. They, on speaking to them, they feel that it's a more organised organisation now. They seem to be more well equipped. There seems to be more of a focus as to what they do there and how they go about doing it. The training seems to be a lot more suitable for what they're ultimately going to be asked to do, in terms of being involved in future conflicts or when they come to be deployed. I've put some of within the images, there's some of the Army recruitment media that you see around on the TV, within the barracks, and it's very much about increasing recruitment, but a lot of it is very focused on, they provide kind of visuals of this kind of like an extreme kind of sport kind of activity, which I suppose encourages young people to want to join the reserves. There is material about the financial incentives that people gain from being a reservist, but for me, I never felt that there was anything that really gave me. Obviously, I'm not involved directly within the military. There was no real material that I found that was really about the people who were involved. And my question was, why would somebody who's a civilian want to be ultimately want to join the army and be involved in a military organisation? And there's a number of different reasons. A lot of the people who I interviewed were often trades people, so they work within a particular trade. Their explanation for a lot of the time was for joining the reserves was there's that element of flexibility within their working patterns. There was a number of public sector workers, so there was a number of teachers who I interviewed, a number of council workers, and then there was also a number of students, quite a large proportion of students that were using it to gain more experience, but also to gain financially from it, to support the studies. So the way they say it was, I go to university, I can go to do what I do within the Army Reserves, have a good time, enjoy myself, be trained, gain experience, gain skills, qualifications, and ultimately carry on with my higher education. There was also, surprisingly enough, quite a number of unemployed people as well, which I was quite surprised in the fact that obviously the people who are unemployed can continue to gain, gain from the benefits that they would receive, which are, yeah, so they get paid through the army, yeah, but they also they maintain their benefits, and so they can still receive those. So yeah, so a kind of broad range, but broader than I anticipated, really. And again, I was surprised that there isn't that much nationalistic sentiment coming through within the opinions and the footage that I've received. It is very much for practical reasons. There is obviously you hear beliefs coming through about national security and you know, I suppose that identity of the army. There is that comes through, and being part of something, being part of a group, feeling that you kind of belong to something. So there are those traditional kind of things that come through. But there is other, like I've said, there's also other incentives that I actually think. I think that if those were known about, probably more than what they are, I think people would possibly be more inclined to, if not, just look at what the reserves can offer them. They are, just like any other reservist, they can be asked to be deployed at any time, and depending on their work commitments, it depends on how readily they are available to do that. By my understanding of it, they can say no. They can. They don't have to. There's nothing forcing them to actually be deployed. But the way they see it is, you know, why go through the training if I'm not actually going to go and actually do what I've been trained for.
That's all this week on Odds Alive. See you next time.